Hi guys, I'm going to do a diorama. It's an idea I've had for a little bit and I've already started it. Just a snowy effect with like a wooded banking or wooded hillside. You can see all I've done is layered up some polystyrene at the back and I've poured plaster of Paris over the top of it. You see the plaster of Paris hasn't adhered to... It was like a board with like obviously a glossy finish on it a little bit. So at first I thought I'd put some PVA and some paint mixture on it. I kind of combined my paint with glue a little bit anyway, but I just would like to have a smoother slope on it as well. So I'm going to do another batch of plaster. You see there I've got my coffee pot. That's what I dilute my plaster of Paris with. Not only does it give it some colour, it gives it the granules, the coffee granules as well. And you can see that colour's the natural colour of coffee and plaster mixed together. So that you could get away with it as a desert or a very dry track. Usually I add some watered down, some washes as well. And then I've got the flock and scattered granules, different effects that you can put over the top. Today I'm going to try and do some snow effects. But yeah, instead of just gluing it all together again, I'm going to do another layer of plaster over the top, and that'll secure the it'll secure the bits that are damaged, that are coming loose a little bit. Because it's textured, it should adhere quite well. Like I say, I've just got flat polystyrene layers, and I've built up, I think, 3 or 4 layers there against that backboard as the hillside. Then I just ran, you can see the tub that I work with, like an old ice cream tub. I just did one of those tubs to start off with, so now I'm doing a second one. So there'd be a nice thick layer to it. I've got all sorts of flocks and dusts and particles and things that I've collected from the garden, from the kitchen. The mud that I put on tank tracks is sieved soil, dry soil out of the garden, mixed with used coffee grounds, dried. Everything, as long as everything's dried before it gets bagged, dried before it goes in jars and containers, else it'll go mouldy if it's still got moisture in it. And then to make the tank tracks mud, I just add PVA and paint to that soil and coffee combination. And I think it gives a nice thick, sticky kind of mud-like effect. And it's free. And also in the actual plaster mixture that you can see there, plaster of Paris, coffee grounds and water, and I add fine tea leaves, the dust that you get in tea bags. I've got that in a big sack, and that's not used. That's just dried tea leaves, and I dust that in as well. And it just gives it more interest. I'd rather put it in, the mixture, and then be able to paint it and work on top of it, than dust it over with PVA glue and forever be chipping it off. So this is for a Russian tank. At the moment I love doing Soviet tanks in winter settings with snow on or snow camouflage. And this was just an idea of like a kind of sunken road or a track with a hillside on one side. I'm trying to stabilise the shattered plaster underneath that was too thin. I don't see why this wouldn't stabilise it, because there's a lot of the original plaster underneath stuck really well. So at least it's got that to adhere to. Another thing I use is like a grass effect flock, which was from putting actual dried summer grass from a cut lawn that had dried out on the floor for ages into a blender. I have a flock, obviously leaves that turn in autumn on the tree. The tree saps the vitamins out of the leaves, so they turn from green to brown. But obviously if you snip green leaves snip a branch, snip the leaves off something in the summer, or a house plant. The green's retained in there when it dries, and I've blended leaves that have fallen off house plants that have got very dry and crisp to make a kind of grass flock effect as well, or just even smashed up leaves to be leaf litter. I use the posh kind of bigger tea leaves that you can buy loose, again for like a leaf litter, which I'm going to use in this actually. Just several things. Just keep your eyes open when you're looking around, and you'll see when I start putting the trees on this diorama. They are natural out of the garden as well. The slope's only slightly smoother, softer gradient, but there's a thicker layer now that I can imprint the tyre tracks, the vinyl tracks. You know, I just push them into the soft plaster as it's drying. Use a brush, you know, just to smarten up around the edges. Make sure that it's cohesive. It's really easy to get a mud-like effect, I think. I struggle when it comes to footprints. You get them model chaps and push their feet into it, but I can never get the perfect consistency of the plaster to get that to kind of resonate on the actual surface, to stick on the surface. Tank tracks lovely, tyres fine, footprints I just kind of get the brush handle, the paintbrush handle, and like jab it to try and roughen up the surface. I couldn't tell you what plant the tree effect trees are from. Very, very narrow. They're like saplings. I think it was a stilby. There you can see the plaster's dried. The leaf litter's stuck. Like I say, that's old tea leaves. And the trees, you can see, are the dead flower heads of a shrub out of my own garden. Not a shrub, an annual. Yeah. I don't think they'd stand up to much kind of rough treatment because they're very, very fragile. But for the sake of just putting it in a cabinet, putting a tank on it, I think they're perfect. The difference in texture looking at that is just because I've put some PVA glue down in a spray bottle that I got out of the kitchen. It did have oil in it. So that's now got PVA glue 50%, water 50%. And I sprayed it on for adding any flock or any effects. I don't want to be brushing PVA glue on. See there. You spray it on before or after, I think. It just fixes. I love the way that the tea leaves there have kind of cascaded down the hillside a little bit. And, the wind's blown. Foliage at the start of winter. So I'm putting PVA on now, not just to secure those leaves, but because I'm going to dust snow on this. I've not done a lot of paint effects because I'm dusting over it with snow. The texture was more important to me. I have pressed the vinyl tracks back into it. As you can see, it's not perfect, and I don't do it to the vehicle specifically. I don't do like a track behind the one vehicle. I always just do it as a kind of well-worn path. So the snow effect is it's not a bought one, it's a kitchen created one. And I had a pot of baking powder and a pot of bicarbonate of soda that were both expiring. So I combined them. As I was combining them, there seemed more of a sheen, more of a glistening effect on the bicarbonate of soda. Maybe I should have kept them separately and used those effects individually, but I just combined the two. And I just make sure that I dust it on carefully with a tea strainer. Just a nylon strainer. Impossible to do while holding a camera. So that's over a very wet board now, a very wet surface, which is, like I say, 50% PVA, 50% water. The plaster's completely dry now. And I think with the rough tea leaves that you can see on there, the nice texture that they give, and then the snow kind of doesn't just hide everything, it kind of sits on top of things. There you go. See, there's kind of shadows and there's folds and there's a bit of colour coming through. This works for like a light snowfall. I'd be interesting to do like a really heavy, to do a scene where the tank is churning through deep snow. I've never done that. I'd have to think about that and how that would be. But I think it'd just be plaster, painted white, and then the very top surface finished in this same way. And work on the hillside. PVA glue in the trees as well. Be nice to catch some snow just on the branches. So generally the only thing that I purchase, the only branded item that I use for this kind of winter scene would be the water effects, AK Interactive still water, and I colour that generally with a very light brown, or sometimes with a kind of irony rust colour, which looks really nice when you fill the footprints and the tyre tracks. I don't think I'm going to do it on this. I don't know if anybody knows why that keeps flaking though. I put a little bit of acrylic paint in with the AK still water, and I find that when it dries, it sometimes flakes like the scales on a fish, and they kind of lift up a little bit at the edge. I don't know if I'm putting the wrong kind of paint on it. I don't mind the effect because it just looks like a kind of puddle that's drying up and cracking. So I don't mind it so much, but I don't know why I can't get a flat surface with shallow water effects with that AK still water. When I run out of this, I'll try another brand, I'll try a different kind. So it's quite a light dusting. The track left with no snow on, but I could have done the whole track covered in snow and then just used the vinyl tank tracks, maybe wet them and push them into the snow to make just tank tracks, but I wanted to leave the road clear. You see how thin those are. They're to scale, I think, those trees. I think I have enough to make another one diorama, because it was one plant pot that had them. So most of that texture that you see there is just adding additives to the plaster. That's all. Some grains, coffee grains. Like I say, I wouldn't stand up. I wouldn't stand up to being dropped, but there you go, guys. Let me know what you think. I think this tank's too small to put on this particular one. I'll get a bigger tank.